How do you release trapped emotions in your body? Did you even know that you have trapped emotions in your body? We all do. Our body tells a story. The things that we think about impact us both mentally and physically, as well as having an imprint into our mental health, as well as physical health, and just actually storing those emotions in ourselves. So what does that mean for you and I? It's first about understanding emotions and being aware of them, having insight into how you feel, and then having insight into where it's being stored in the body. We know that trauma changes us. We know that the experiences in our life change us, and they have an imprint in our body. And some of these things, some of these emotions need to be processed and let go so that we can hold on to joyous emotions and have healthy cells. When our body is holding on to a negative emotion, it's actually impacting the function of those cells. And the more cumulative emotions that we're holding on to, the more it begins to impact us in physical ways. My name is Cristi Bundukamara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I treat people with mental health diagnoses like depression and anxiety and bipolar. I am an expert in grief and trauma. I have personally lost 3 children and my husband. So I'm a grieving mother and a widow, and I'm still standing. I have learned to separate my grief and trauma and process my trauma, begin to release those negative feelings and hold on to the joys and even to my grief. So let's talk about your emotions. What emotions do you maybe struggle with? What negative emotions do you struggle with the most? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Is it negative thoughts and the way that you talk to yourself? All of those things are putting a continuous imprint of emotions that we're holding on to. And oftentimes, they stem from either limiting beliefs, core beliefs that are negative, and it's impacting the way that we receive and perceive the world around us and our circumstances. Now, you may have been through some horrific things, unimaginable pain. As you can imagine, I have. But I've also learned to identify those emotions and learn to process them. We always say you should process your feelings, but we don't talk about how to do that. It is all types of movement is the answer. So there's one umbrella answer of movement. Movement is the way that we get emotions out of the body. Now, talk therapy, if you go to counseling, sometimes just talking about what is going on can be helpful, but sometimes it can be ruminating, right? If we think and talk about our problems so much, we could actually be imprinting them stronger into our DNA. So I want you to think about those emotions, those experiences, and I want to talk about how you process those things out of your body. I'm going to basically go through a list of things that I have personally tried that I think are either very helpful or somewhat helpful in moving things out of the body, moving these emotions out of the body so they're not trapped, right? If you're holding on to them, they become trapped, and then they begin to cause other problems. Breathwork. I'm going to start with breathwork because it is literally my hardest thing. So you can imagine grief for me sits very heavy. And grief is often felt in the chest and in the heart and in the breath. And breath work is one of the hardest things for me, but it is somewhat helpful. I think as I continue to grow in my journey and I can learn to better embrace breath work, I think it could be life-changing. It could be significant improvement. But I'm being honest with you here. It has been a huge struggle. I lost a son in a drowning accident in 2005. I lost my son Reggie after 10 years of medical trauma in 2016. And just 3 years ago, I lost my daughter to a sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. Hers was the most traumatic loss. And I lost my husband just this year after months of hospice, right? So breath is very hard for me. But I encourage you to look into it. It is definitely a way to move those trapped emotions out of the body. Any kind of movement I talked about, right? But if it's intentional, you'll get more out of it. I often hear people who are like runners say, running is my mental health. It is my therapy. And I say, that's great. But what happens when you sprain your ankle and you can't run for 3 months, right? Is there other things around that? I personally hate to run, but I will go for a walk in nature and go in with an intention of releasing something. So sometimes I actually go on walks and cry. Like I'm moving it and I'm crying and I'm placing that intention of moving it out of the body. Yoga is a very specific somatic release. There are even practitioners who are somatic yoga instructors, trauma yoga instructors that can help identify where these things are. But even light stretching in your room can begin to release some of these emotions that are in the body. Art, music, creativity, these are all forms of movement, right? And they don't work for everyone. I'm very creative in my work endeavors and solution focused, and I get pride from that, which helps some of my negative beliefs. But art and creativity hasn't been specifically around my story. But I know so many people who their art, their music is part of their healing journey. We have one client in our practice that, we do this thing called a thought map, and we use words and bubbles. And instead he drew multiple pictures. And he's like, this is my thought map. And that is a beautiful way to release some of those trapped emotions. Music by itself has a vibration to it. Even if you're not personally playing or creating music, if you are listening to music, it has a vibration and can help move things out of the body. I've personally done a sound healing where someone takes instruments and bowls and drums and vibration tools at certain frequencies to help begin to move those things. That goes into other types of energy work. There are things like emotional freedom technique and Reiki, body talk are some energy work that I've personally experienced. But this is where someone who has been trained in a certain technique to be able to help move this negative emotion out of the body. Therapeutic Touch, I did this with my son for many, many years. We did one called neurofascial processing where I would have 10 volunteers come and put their hands on my son for an hour and just to help to process things so that he was not holding on. There's a physical component to that as well, not just emotional pain. We can move some physical pain out of the body with touch therapies as well. Therapeutic touch is another example of a touch therapy. Mindfulness, meditation. I know that when you are struggling with depression and anxiety, mindfulness and meditation might be hard to really get into. Because when you sit and you are quiet and you try to quiet your mind and you try to listen, all you hear is that negative dialogue. If that is the case, you need to work on cognitive behavioral skills before going into meditation. What I teach is the Mentally Strong method, and that is a way to think through your problems, organize them, so that you can make choices to be mindful and to meditate and to put the negative thoughts into a separate category. I teach a lot of these things specifically around grief and trauma. I invite you to click on the link to learn about what I can do to help guide you through your journey. I am standing here because I did the work. I know how to work through grief and trauma, and I want to help you. So there's not one answer to this, what do you do with these trapped emotions? But I want you to take the information that you're learning here and look at what might you try to do. Even just do a Google search. What are some breathwork activities, right? And try that. See if you feel better. The main thing is finding what works for you. Remember back when we talked about movement and I said I hate running? In my younger years, I used to force myself to run because that was the healthy way to lose weight, or that I was in the military and we had to, run for our physical training test. But it wasn't therapeutic for me because it just reinforced that I hate it, right? But I personally love yoga and dance, and I go and do a little bit of gymnastics, right? So it's these movements that allow us to be ourselves, what really works for us. And so that is my challenge to you, is acknowledge that there's trapped emotions, and then let's find a way to move those things out of the body. I have a few questions from my viewers. I've tried a few of these things and they don't work. I get it. I have too. Going back to a cognitive behavioral approach, of course, I teach the Mentally Strong method, but a cognitive behavioral approach is knowing that what you think impacts your mood and behavior. And so if you think something's not going to work, it's more likely not going to work. If you think it's too much, it's going to be too much, right? But also being curious and creative in finding what works for you. But I do think you need to kind of take a step back and go through a cognitive behavioral process. What am I thinking, and how is my thoughts impacting my mood and my behavior? And, people could even say a story of hating running is part of why I hate running. And that could be true. But I have found ways to help move these things out of my body. Next question. My doctor says none of these things have scientific backing, and he recommended medication. Obviously, on a video like this, I can't give advice, but I prescribe medication every day. I think there is a definite place for medication. One of the lines that I, draw is if you are feeling like hurting yourself or anyone else, then you need to try medication. But also, if you have tried a lot of these things and nothing is working, or you just can't get out of, right? Because yes, it could be trapped emotions in the body, but it could be so cumulative that one or two of these exercises is not going to release it. So you need a combination of taking this medication, specifically antidepressants help boost neurotransmission. If you are more on the bipolar spectrum, needing that mood stabilization for the ion channels in your brain. These are all things that your doctor has specific knowledge on. And as it relates to the science, there is science behind somatic techniques. Is it as robust as your medication? No, it's not. The reality is medication works quickly, and when we need to function, we might need to choose something that works quickly. That doesn't mean you don't also work through, what these emotions are and how do I move them out of the body. So both can be true. Last question is there's so much out there in this space of mindfulness, meditation. Where do I start with trying to release somatically? And I will just give you kind of the threefold. First, identify your emotions, right? You have to have insight and knowledge into what they are to be able to release them. Make a conscious intent to release them, and then continue to find different things Now, I've shared a little bit of my story of losing 3 children and my husband and this weight of grief and trauma in my life. Is it all gone? No. I still hold some of those things. One of the things that I talk about in my grief intensive is this ability to separate the grief and trauma, because grief we rightfully can hold on to, trauma we need to release. And I am actively working on that process still. And it is a lifetime journey, but it does get easier, less intense, and less frequent in which you need to do it over time. So start with being able to identify, making the intent to release. And if you don't know what practitioner to go to, you could try simple stretches in your home. What muscles are tight? Get in a position that stretches that muscle and see if the emotion, just, raise the intent of consciousness of what emotion is being held here. I often feel pressure in my upper back. Remember I talked about grief being the lungs? It is because I get in a energetically protective mode that feels like this. It doesn't look like this. I stand up straight. I walk straight, I think. But emotionally, energetically, I am protective. And that causes this problems in my back. So I will lay on like a bolster, put my hands above my head, and just open up the front chest and stretching out the back. It's a simple thing you can do at home, and you don't need a professional to tell you where you're holding these things. You can feel it. So thank you for watching. Continue with the physical impact of grief on the body, and remember that you are mentally strong.